They called it a malfunction for the first 3 years. I was there for all 6. My name is Naravas. I was assigned to the Velthari Palace antechamber, in what my government diplomatically called a liaison capacity, which meant I was the one who sat beside the archive and wrote the failure reports. Every 6 weeks, a new team of experts arrived. Xenolinguists, quantum archaeologists, AI restoration specialists, a pair of neurosurgeons who had somehow convinced 3 separate ministries that consciousness mapping was the relevant field. Every 6 weeks, they would spend their allotted time running their allotted procedures, and the archive would do what the archive had always done: nothing. It was not an inert slab. I want to be clear about that, because the later accounts made it sound like a dead machine, and it was never dead. It breathed in its way. The surface, a curved console of something we had no good word for, a material between glass and bone, pale gray and faintly translucent, held a warmth that did not come from any power source we could identify. The Velthari, who had ceded the palace to the joint authority after the accord, told us only that the archive predated their civilization by an order of magnitude. They were not comfortable specifying. They called it the first memory. They said it had spoken once, in a time their oldest stories could not quite reach. They said it had been waiting since then to speak again. None of that made it into the official reports. The official reports said, no response to input, no response to resonance calibration, no response to symbolic language upload, no response to acoustic frequency mapping, consistent surface temperature of 31 degrees, regardless of ambient conditions. Recommend continued monitoring. Wrote that last line 41 times. My actual job was translation work, processing the Velthari secondary language corpus, cross-referencing recovered texts, filing the kind of dense linguistic catalogs that no one read until they suddenly, desperately needed them. It was quiet work. I did most of it in the antechamber because the archive room had better acoustics, and the terminal connection was faster. And also, if I am honest, because the archive itself was good company. It did not demand anything of me. It simply sat there in its warm gray patience, and I sat across from it, and we kept each other's hours. I had been assigned there long enough that I stopped thinking of it as strange. There was a melody my grandmother used to sing. I could not have told you where it came from. She said her own mother had taught it to her. That woman had learned it from someone older still. And the trail went back into the kind of family history that lives in memory rather than words. It was not a complicated piece. 4 bars, maybe 5, the kind of thing you hum without deciding to. The way certain melodies live below the level of intention and surface. Only when you are tired, or alone, or working through something that has no words. I had been humming it for years in that room without noticing. The night it happened, I was running a cross-reference on a Velthari funerary text. Late, the building quiet, the overhead panels dimmed to working level. I had a cup of something warm going cold beside the terminal. I was tired in the way that becomes invisible after the 3rd year of the same posting. I was humming. I heard it a moment before I understood it. A tone. Not from the terminal. From across the room I stopped. The tone stopped. I sat very still and told myself the ventilation system had shifted frequency, or the building's thermal cycle had produced a resonance effect, or any of the 17 sensible explanations that were immediately available. Then I hummed the next bar. The archive answered. Not loudly, dramatically. A single tone, the correct pitch, sustained for exactly the duration I would have held it. And then it waited. The way a person waits when they know the next line and are offering you the space to sing it. My hands were not entirely steady when I pushed back from the terminal. I crossed the room slowly. The archive's surface had changed. Not glowing, not precisely, but warmer looking. The gray of it shifted towards something I would have called gold, if gold could be a quality of light, rather than a color. The warmth I could always feel from 3 feet away was now something I felt on the skin of my arms, my face, the palms I raised instinctively as I approached. I stood in front of it and I sang the melody, all of it. The full 4 bars, then the 2 that my grandmother always added at the end that she said were the oldest part her mother had called the returning phrase. The part that sounds, if you have grown up with it, like something arriving home. The archive was silent for the length of a breath. I stood there in the changed light, with my hands still raised and my throat still open and the last note fading into the air of the room. The circular patterns on the surface had slowed. They were not waiting in the way a machine's waits for a prompt. They were waiting in the way a person waits when they already know the answer and are simply giving you the time to be ready to hear it. Then it sang back, all of it, every bar, every inflection, every place where the melody dips and then catches itself, every small hesitation in the third bar that I had always assumed was my grandmother's particular interpretation. It sang back with a fidelity that made the hair on my arms stand upright, because it was not an approximation. It was not a reconstruction from the bars I had provided. It knew the rest. It had always known the rest. The gold deepened. The surface began to move in slow, circular patterns of light, the way water subs one seeing subs from beneath. It rose toward me. The light, the warmth, the sense of presence that I had no language for, except the oldest one I knew, which was the feeling of being recognized. I was not a xenolinguist. I was not a consciousness specialist or a quantum archaeologist or any of the things the reports had said this moment would require. I was a translator who had been sent to a posting no one else wanted, had learned a song from a woman who had learned it from a woman before her. Going back in a chain I had never thought to measure. The archive spoke. It did not speak in Velthari. It did not speak in any language on record. It spoke in something that arrived not in my ears but in my sternum, in the place where music lives before it has words, in the register that the body answers before the mind has time to question. It spoke one line, first voice, I remember. I stood there for a long time. Later, there would be an extraordinary number of meetings. There would be specialists flown in from 4 systems. There would be official inquiries into why I had not immediately filed a report, and into what exactly the archive had said, and into the chain of linguistic provenance that connected a dead alien intelligence to a melody passed woman to woman across 11 generations of a family that had never, as far as any record showed, set foot anywhere near this world. I did not have good answers to most of those questions. What I had was this. I had a grandmother who used to stand at her kitchen window in the early morning and sing the returning phrase with her eyes closed and a look on her face that I had always thought was simply peace. I understood now that it was something older than peace. It was the look of someone carrying a thing they cannot put down and have stopped trying to explain. Someone keeping a song alive because they knew, somewhere below intention, that the song mattered, that something, somewhere, was still listening for it. The archive had been waiting for 11 generations. It had waited through every expert, every calibration, every careful procedure. It had held its warmth through 6 years of failure reports and 41 recommendations for continued monitoring. It had known what it was waiting for with a patience that made the concept of patience feel inadequate. The way a stone knows water, not by counting the years, but by the quality of its own stillness. And then a tired translator had hummed 4 bars in an empty room, and the oldest memory in the building had said, "Yes, they're that one." I went back the next morning before the meeting started. I sat across from the archive the way I had sat across from it for 6 years, and I hummed the melody, and it hummed back, and for a little while it was just the 2 of us in the quiet, the way it had always been. Except now I knew what the quiet had been full of. My grandmother would have understood. She always said that some things wait for the right voice. She said it the way people say things that are true, without being able to explain why they know it, with the certainty of something been carried long, enough that the weight has become part of the body. She was right. She had always been right. I think she knew.